Dr. Beth Westie, welcome to the Primal Potential podcast. How you doing?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to do this. And okay, funny story. So I've been sharing with my podcast audience all along kind of what's been going on and how at first everybody was telling me it was anxiety. And so I was trying to like make these changes for anxiety. And then I'm like, well, this doesn't seem like anxiety. And then I shared with them when I first did the GI map with you and H. pylori. And then after the food sensitivity, I did another episode. I told them all you were coming on. And it was funny because last week I released an episode and I almost pulled it down before it aired because I was like, I was giving them an overview of the food sensitivities and what changed and whatnot. And I was like, I don't know if this is helpful or if this just feels like talking about myself. And I got so many messages. It's always like that. You know, the episode you put
Yeah.
out that you think isn't gonna like hit, everybody's like, oh my God, this was so helpful. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're talking about this. So
Yeah.
everyone was thrilled to know that you're coming on to talk in more detail. I sort of gave my own personal experience of
Mhm.
what led me to go through the GI map process with you, and then what led me to take the next step and do food sensitivity testing. But I didn't get into like the nitty gritty. And I told everybody that we were just going to talk through my actual test results. I'm hiding nothing. Everybody can see what's happening in my gut, in my body. We're going to talk about it. But first, can you just give us like the super high level overview of what the GI map is and what it does and why it matters?
Yeah. I love a GI map because it's more than just a stool test. There's a big difference in getting a full GI map versus if you have gut issues and your regular, practitioner at a regular medical office, they're like, "Oh, we'll run a stool test." They're checking for like a few big parasites. Other than
Mhm.
that, they don't check to see how is your bacterial balance? Do you have a candida issue, right? Are there certain markers present that are letting us know how well you're digesting carbs, fats, all that stuff? We see all of that in a GI map and more. So it gives us this huge in-depth look at how your digestive system is functioning, how well you're absorbing nutrients, if there's other toxic garbage being created because of the bacteria in there. So it's so valuable to get this information, especially if you've been trying a ton of things and nothing has improved your gut for a long time.
So is this
Yeah.
something, do you think that the people who should consider, because it's an investment, right?
It
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, in the scheme of things, it's not the most expensive thing in the world, but it's not 10,
Yeah.
15, $20. Do you think that this is a good option for folks who are struggling with GI issues, or is it more than that? You know, because for me, I talk all the time about the link between our mental health and our gut health. So is this something that you would point people towards if they're having noticeable gut issues, or are there other things that maybe are outside of gut issues that make a GI map make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It is not just gut issues. Gut issues are a primary driver for a lot of people, but I'm so glad that you brought this up because, yeah, there are so many other things that are connected to the gut. I've worked with gals that they have acne, really bad acne, hormonal acne, all this stuff. And they're like, it's better, but it's not gone. What the heck am I missing? We do a GI map, and I'm like, oh, there it is. Yeah, your gut's not
Yeah.
detoxing. And we change those pathways and completely changes their skin. So
Mm.
there's a lot of reasons to do a GI map. And there's a lot of people too that once we start improving how your gut functions, they realize, oh, I didn't realize I was bloated all the time before. I was bloated 24/7. And now
Yeah.
my stomach feels flat all the time. Is that
You
weird?
know
I'm
what's
like,
interesting
no.
with the bloating thing? This is my
Yeah.
experience with myself and also with my clients. Having been overweight for most of my life, it's almost like you don't notice bloating as much when you're overweight
Yeah.
because you've got extra belly fat and you're not noticing the difference of, you know, a centimeter here or a 7 centimeter there, the way that when I am leaner, it is very noticeable. And so I often wonder, are there a lot of people who are overweight and don't know bloating just being one of many symptoms that they're having this, that this is abnormal, that this is causing problems, that this is a sign of a problem, and they just don't know because it's their normal.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. 100%. That happens a lot. A lot, a lot, a lot. Yeah.
So I wanted to just dive in. If you're listening on the podcast, you can't see this, but I'm going to put this video up on the Primal Potential YouTube station that never has anything put on there. But I'm going to actually pull up my GI map. And there are a few specific questions I have for you. But before we get into that, can you just kind of walk us through section by section what this report shows? Like the first section here is talking about pathogens, viral, parasitic, bacterial. Is this just like an overview?
Yeah. So how I go through a GI map is, I mean, they label everything really well. They have things listed, and then of course there's usually a little like description of some stuff here, but it is really helpful to have a practitioner go through it with you because it's so in
Yeah.
depth, and because sometimes the numbers are, oh, it's listed here, but it says it's within normal. Is that okay or is that not okay? So I
Right.
describe the first page as kind of the big bad stuff, like, listed on there, there's like salmonella. People are familiar with that. They know that that can cause food poisoning type of thing. Yep. So they're checking for bigger things that you would have been exposed to that cause gut issues. So that's
E.
kind of the first
coli is
page.
on here.
Yes.
Yeah. Giardia.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
those
all
are
of that
more major
was
things.
not was below detectable limits for me. So that's a
Yes.
big old win.
Yes, yeah. So if there's no number listed under the results and there's that like arrow DL that's below detectable limits, all of that. Perfect. Yay.
And then we get to page 2, which is where we see my first problem. H.
Yeah.
pylori is high. I've got a couple questions for you here.
Yeah.
When it's high, is it one of those things where like there's a difference between you're right on the line, like you're right barely high, and oh no, you're like super, super, super high. It doesn't show me a scale the way that it does for some of the bacterial. There's almost like a sliding scale. So it doesn't show me like you're super close to normal and it's slightly problematic, or you're like way far from normal and it's really, really problematic. Are you, with your experience, are you able to look at this and be like, this is crazy bonkers high, or this is like kind of a little high?
Yes. Yeah. So with the H. pylori specifically looking at it, I do look at the number itself. And
Mhm.
I am one, just from clinical experience, that I would rather have it be very, very tiny amount there or just not there at all.
Yeah.
Right? Not there at all. What I have found, especially in conjunction with doing hormone testing, seeing somebody's cortisol levels, H. pylori is reactive to stress. It is
Yeah.
the bacteria that they realized causes stomach ulcers.
Yeah.
So stress is a factor. Stress is a big factor in this specific thing we're looking at. And man, if I know that your cortisol levels are not good and I see H. pylori here, whew, I'd rather see like
Yeah.
work on getting no H. pylori and being like, oh, there's a little bit, it's fine. No,
Right.
yeah, I'm gonna be
Right.
pickier about that, if that makes sense.
Do
Yeah.
you feel like if this was, mine says 1.68 E3, if
Hmm.
would it show up if it was 1.01, right? It would, right? It would
Yeah.
still say high because that's lower than the threshold,
Yes.
or that's higher than the threshold.
Yep. Yeah. And this test is very, very, very sensitive. They're essentially testing
Mhm.
like parts per million in a
Yeah,
gram of sample, which a gram is about the
right.
weight of a paper clip. So the
Yep.
testing that they're doing, and this GI mapping is kind of the gold standard for tests. So there's other, GI maps and things like that, but I love this one because it is so, so, so sensitive overall. Yeah.
Have you, can you think of a number, like, have you seen numbers way higher than this?
Yeah.
Okay. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm.
And
H. pylori is a
yeah,
nasty one.
so a few things with H. pylori just to keep in mind. It is pretty common, 50% of the population can have it. And it's also really common within households. So you
Mhm.
share a microbiome with people that you live with and eat with and, are around.
Yeah.
You share those germs and everything, right? So if you have stomach issues and other people you live with also have stomach issues, it's worth it to dive into that together. Otherwise, if you work on your gut health and other people you live with don't, we don't want it to resurface for you down the road if you've done a lot of work.
Now, below the H. pylori result are a bunch of different virulence factors.
Hmm.
What does that mean? All of mine were negative. What are these? What does it mean? Does it matter that mine are negative versus positive?
Yes. So the essentially, and again, it's a very sensitive test. How they look at that is that it is the virulence factors represent the genetic potential for an H. pylori strain to cause any other type of pathology. So if there were virulence factors, I would look at that and say, okay, is there a worse thing going on here? Do we need to treat this? Because with H. pylori, there are some people who the treatment would be an antibiotic round. Do you need to go on an
Right.
antibiotic? Is it that strong and bad of a type there that it would need to be like wiped out? And for you,
So
there's no
essentially,
virulence factors,
which is awesome because
which is
one of
good.
the risk factors for colon cancer
Yeah.
is H. pylori, right? It can
Hmm.
increase your risk. And so if I'm understanding you right, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you have some of these virulence factors, it means that you are at higher risk for a more serious development as a result of H. pylori, or even that something more serious is present in your system. Is that correct?
Yes. Hmm. Yeah. Yep.
So I should be comforted in my
Yes.
moments of worry that it is a good sign for my overall health, but also my gut health, that all of these virulence factors are negative.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. And
Okay.
and to keep in mind, like usually for things to get that bad, where I'd be concerned with, cancer potential and all that stuff. I mean, typically that's not something that happens overnight. It's present
Sure.
for years of time, a long,
Yep.
long period of time at high levels, the virulence factors, all those things kind of built in together and other factors as well, typically. So it's just one of the things we look at. Um, but a lot of people, because your digestive system tells you that there's a problem or there's other issue, you're looking into it, you're diving into it to make sure you're being, as proactive as possible, which you are fantastic at doing. So I love
Because I'm
it.
a little bit of a nut wagon, but I got people like you to usher me through that. Okay, so this next section looks at, so if the first page is like the big bad nasty bacteria,
Hmm.
this next section is also bacteria. How is this section different from that first page? What kind of bacteria are we looking at here?
Yeah, so I generally call this your good bacteria, the commensal or keystone bacteria. These are bacteria that you want to have certain amounts of it present. You want it there, certain strengths of it, that type of a thing. Um, yeah, helps you have a good mucus layer, all that stuff. Good, healthy gut function to have these bacteria present and in the right amount. Hmm.
Well, and I love that you point that out because the cool thing about the visual on this report is it's not like, well, because they're good bacteria, more is better. You actually don't want too much
Right.
and you don't want too little. And I actually have too much of one of these commensal bacteria, and I also have too little of others. And if I remember correctly, it's been a few weeks since we talked when I first got this report, but I feel like you also were saying that I likely am experiencing SIBO. And is it this section that told you that?
Yeah, this one and the next one. Yeah, there's
Okay.
certain
Okay,
like
cool.
combinations of the bacteria where we're like, yep, that one is linked with SIBO, this is linked with SIBO, and you get enough of them together, you're like, yep, this is all connected with SIBO. Which
So let's look.
SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, is
Right.
the
Thank you. Because I know
acronym.
not everybody is initiated into this world of diving deep into gut health. So these are the good guys, but the thing about the good guys is you don't want too little, but you also don't want too much, which is why I think some people just go crazy excited for everything with probiotics. And it's like, careful now, honey buns. Like you
Yeah.
could be putting yourself in a, because sometimes we think like, well, if it's good, then more is better. And it's a delicate balance that we have to take seriously. So I love that this is like a sliding scale. I wish that H. pylori read that way too. So I could be like, okay, I'm closer to the green than I am to the red, and I'm only in the yellow. I like that. It gives me a little bit of peace. But okay,
Yeah.
the first one for me that's in the like yellowish reddish is down here. I'm not even going to try to say it, but talk to me. For those of you that can see it on the screen, maybe you can say it more successfully than I can. And I was a Latin major too, but man, Calibacterium prausnitzii.
Yeah, the
That's a mouthful.
Faecalibacterium. Yep. Yeah, that's pretty, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what does this guy do?
Yeah. So this one is a very important bacteria that produces a butyrate, which is really
Okay.
important for anti-inflammatory things and the
Right, like
mucus
that's what our
health.
short chain fatty acids do, right? They
Yep.
produce butyrate. Yep, and that's like a
Yep.
really good, healthy, necessary thing.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And if you're not having that, so that can impact nutrient levels, digestive process, all this stuff, because it's not about what you eat, it's about what you absorb. And these
Right.
bacteria impact how that all happens. So that's
So
one of the
I'm
big
not
things with that.
able to like, if I'm not able to break down my food in a way that allows butyrate to be established. Is that kind of what we're talking about here? Because then
Yeah.
my mind goes to like, ooh, should I be supplementing with MCT oil?
I
Or do I
mean,
lack the bacteria to do anything with that?
to do a lot of good stuff with it. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is.
So that helps us. That helps us not waste money on supplements when we
Yes.
understand
Yeah. And
what's
also,
going
I
on
love
here.
that you said like more is not just better. Oh, my gut hurts. I just need more probiotic.
Right.
That's sort of just trying to throw stuff at your digestive health, hoping that it improves it. Whereas you can see how many good bacteria are listed. And if you look at any probiotic bottle, it's not going to have this full scope of things. There's different ones. Each brand has their own formula for probiotics. And like a
Right. And you
common
need to
one
be
is
choosing one.
lactobacillus, right?
Yep.
But if you
Yep.
have enough lactobacillus, why would you need to pump a ton more in your system? Because it can
And if you
potentially throw
do,
off things.
you, right, exactly. If you do, then you could be creating a problem. And a lot of mine are in the
Mhm.
green. Like a lot of these good
Yeah.
bacteria for me, first one, second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one, sixth one, seventh one, solid. Then we get a couple down. What about this Roseburia?
Oh, this guy. This guy. Ugh. This one is also, related to like the production of short chain fatty acids, all of that. The butyrate, again, very similar.
Yep.
It promotes balance in energy and homeostasis overall for the gut, supports your immunity, supports inflammation processes. Um, yes, and if you don't have good levels of it, then it honestly it can be related with like having they call it irritable bowel. I
Yeah.
don't like to
Yeah.
throw some of those labels out there very often because I don't want it to be scary, but that's
Yeah.
really, yeah, what it's linked to.
Now, one of the things that I know you and I talked about a lot was that where I was in sort of like trouble territory on the low end or the high end with these bacteria was related to carbohydrate metabolism. And I think everybody kind of
Yeah.
like their ears perk up because I know that there's a lot of people who feel like they have trouble with carbohydrate metabolism in one way or another.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how bacteria are involved in that, because I think a lot of folks think just digestive enzymes. They don't think along the bacterial route, and they don't think that they could have a problem with one macronutrient in terms of digestion but not have a problem with others. And it seemed like my report was really indicating that I was in good shape with fats and protein metabolism and less so with carbohydrate. So how does this test paint this picture for people?
Yeah. So with the identification of these specific bacteria, so there's some of this, and again, the Roseburia is another one where it's linked to the butyrate and everything. That's also linked to that leaky gut.
Mm,
There is a big connection there as well. So when people say, "Oh, I have leaky gut," or I Googled leaky gut and I have a lot of those symptoms, why?
yeah,
This is
yeah,
why. So that's a
yeah,
huge piece in absorbing those nutrients and processing them correctly too.
yeah,
Yeah, and when we get to the specific bacteria that breaks down carbohydrates, because some of them, that's their, like, they break them down better than others. They feed off of it better. And if you don't have enough of that bacteria that does that, you're not breaking down carbohydrates correctly, which means they're not processed, the sugars are not utilized then, and your body is more likely to store them. That leads into more insulin, resistance, right? Instead of having good insulin sensitivity, it's insulin resistance, which then allows your body to store things, right? And so it's like
yeah,
where people are, oh my gosh, yes, I eat a cupcake and I feel like I gain 5 pounds. What the heck?
yeah.
It can be related to that specific bacteria. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think, when we think about, to your point, it's not a question so much of what we eat, but what we can use of what we eat, what is accessible. And if we are not effective and efficient in breaking down the food that we eat, not only is it more likely to be stored, but even just the like sitting stagnant in the gut or like fermenting and the issues that can cause, like, I feel like I talk to a lot of people who feel like, yeah, they have bowel movements, but they never feel like they've like fully cleared their system, is
Mhm.
that tied to bacterial imbalances? And again, everybody just wants to take a broad spectrum probiotic, and I think that that's, we've already established that's not necessarily the best approach, but do
No.
you see that in factors related to both constipation and also maybe diarrhea, like those sorts of clearing pathways don't happen as well if you're lacking some of these specific bacteria and you just can't effectively metabolize the food you're eating?
Yeah. So all of it, yes. And how I think of it visually is with how the gut functions. And this is a very simplistic way of breaking down overall gut function because it can be very complex. Is your gut is a tube, right? It's a tube that's muscle. So think of a snake that eats something, right? And it goes all the way through, right?
Right. Yeah. Like
Like it pushes
snake
that.
eating a mouse kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and it just gets moved on down. Well, your stomach does this, it's supposed to churn, like, and it's supposed to do these like different twisting kind of movements too. So it's a really intricate muscular movement and it's smooth muscle. So you don't have control over it, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to move my finger, that muscle movement. It happens automatically, or it should.
Right.
Inside of
Right.
that, you have your cells, right? The lining, all that stuff. So when you talk about the cells, there's lots of, villi there. So it's going to increase surface area to absorb things. Leaky gut is when, the cells are not tightly bound together. And then the inside of that, you've got mucus, a nice,
Mm.
fresh, healthy layer of mucus to protect against other things. So all these things are a factor. And when, when we eat food and we have to break it down, it has to interact with the mucus layer well. It has to be absorbed through the cells, properly, not with a leaky gut. And then people will eat food and they feel like things just kind of sit and fester. And it's because of the inflammation. So, related to that bacterial
Mm.
imbalance, that
Yeah.
bacteria that's in there can create so much inflammation. And that's swelling. Like if you sprain your ankle and there's swelling, there's
Yeah.
fluid, it gets heavy, that
Let
it's
me ask you
very
a question.
heavy. Then you can't move things through as well just because it's so saturated with
Right.
inflammation internally. And it's hard to feel it because the nerve endings and things like that, you don't have the same nerve senses that you do like on your skin
Right.
inside.
Right.
It's totally different.
What is it that is creating the inflammation? Is it a combination of a bunch of different things? Like I'm trying to figure out, in is it just too much of this and not enough of this? Does that cause inflammation? Is it because if you're lacking or you're overpopulated, they can't do their job as well, and so that creates inflammation? Is it when there's dysbiosis and you then don't have the healthiest mucus layer, or you start to have gaps in those tight junctions and that causes inflammation, or is it all of the above?
All of the above. All of the above. And generally, our systems are designed to overcome imbalances, right? Like your system
Yeah,
has a tolerance. So I don't want people to think like, oh my gosh, my body is such this like fragile thing that little things can't be off, or otherwise it all, goes to crap or whatever. Nope. It really
yeah,
has a lot of tolerance and can fight back against things, but there is a threshold with it. So you can have
yeah.
some bacterial imbalance, you can have some inflammation in there, you can have some of this, but if you get over a threshold with it, there it goes, it tips the scales, and that's when the inflammation gets to be too much to properly
Right.
digest, or things won't move through. And if things aren't moving through, then things sit, they fester, the bacterial imbalance increases, your body has a hard time releasing more natural digestive enzymes to push things through. So, yeah.
And that's a really interesting point. Like in my case, it was three back-to-back C-sections. It
Yeah.
was a ton of antibiotics in the hospital with each one of those, just as a natural, that's just a natural response to having a C-section. They're
Yeah.
gonna give you antibiotics. They're just gonna. And then especially for me with the twins, which was my most recent pregnancy, that that was so complicated and my water broke days before they were delivered. And so they had me on antibiotics that whole time because the risk of infection was so high because the babies weren't protected by that sack of water. And so my gut was wiped out in 2020, wiped out in 2021, wiped out in 2022, and still I'm having no symptoms, right? Still I'm feeling
Yeah.
fine. Meanwhile, all those years dealing with the emotional stress, which drives inflammation, among other things, of my daughter's death, then my twins being in critical condition and in the NICU and lack of sleep and all of those sorts of things. I mean, and then when you tack onto that things like
Yeah.
a normal cold and flu or a normal virus that you get exposed to or a stomach flu, like we got hit by the stomach flu for the first time ever this year, and it's like on an already taxed system, like you said, you just get to a point where like the dam breaks, and and it's a whole lot easier to keep up with your gut health than it is to catch up once the dam breaks, so to speak. And I got to the dam is done kind of
Uh-huh.
situation. So yeah, that's a really great point that like, we don't have to panic about like, I need to know which, where I stand with each one of these bacterial species in my body, or else I'm going to get sick. It's like, no, your body is a really, really brilliant machine, but you can't expect it to endure a crappy diet for 100 years, for 50 years, for 20 years, and also chronic stress for year after year after year after year, and then like endless antibiotics. I know people who are on antibiotics every year for something or another, sometimes
Yeah.
multiple times a year. It's like, you can only get so far in an approach like that. So I love that you brought that up. Okay, when we talk about sort of the next page, we'll call them like the pathogenic bacteria, the bad dudes.
Hmm.
Strep was high for me. But
Yeah.
like obviously not talking like strep throat, right? We're just talking about
Right.
this specific bacteria in the gut. Is this one of the things that made you go, okay, piece of the puzzle, SIBO?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So the streptococcus bacteria that was present for you and above range, it's very common.
Yeah,
I see this quite a bit. And just so people know, you're exposed to these types of bacteria all the time. They live on the skin or mucous membranes, or they're on surfaces. Or if you are, and again, I'll just clarify too, I see these elevated with women who are, because again, I mostly work with women, um, kids and animals. If
mm,
you're around kids and animals, especially animals that are inside outside animals, like if you have a dog or a cat that's inside and goes outside, you're just right. So many people are like, oh, you're eating a little snack and then you share it with your puppy. And then you're like, oh, how do I get this bacteria? It's everywhere. They're on things. They're right. So it's not, I want to say that unusual just to be exposed to things in the world like this. But if
sure,
your gut
sure.
bacteria is super healthy and strong and a fighter, it can fight this stuff off. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so this one specifically with the streptococcus, very, very common. Yes, and related to inflammation and gut lining and everything. But oftentimes it's from low stomach acid. Having low
Mm.
stomach acid, you can't kill off the bad bacteria enough. Decreased digestive function, and then SIBO. Those are all things that are linked with this one big time. Yeah.
There's a section here that was all undetectable for me for like candida and all of those, viruses, Epstein-Barr and cytomegalovirus and all of these, worms and different things that kind of can get a lot of airtime. I didn't have any of those, thank goodness.
Yep.
But one of the ones that I wanted to talk about, because that was a big part of what prompted our next step, my
Mm.
secretory IgA was
Yeah.
low. What is that and what does that tell us?
Yes. Yeah. So IG stands for immunoglobulin. So
Mhm.
you're looking at an immune response for the body, and it's specific to that mucus layer in the gut. That's going to be reactive, add more inflammation. And mucus is a protector. Like if you get a cold, you get more mucus in your nose and in your sinuses to protect, right?
Yep.
Natural.
Yep.
Your gut does the same thing. So if you are being exposed to certain foods, and it can be a healthy food, this doesn't mean you're eating garbage. It could be
Right.
garlic. Garlic
Yep.
has so many wonderful healthy properties, but if you have an immune sensitivity to it for whatever reason, your body will have a negative reaction and produce more mucus, add to more of that inflammation, add to more of the problem versus helping. So that's how we see
Yep.
that. It measures whether or not you are having an immune reaction to some of the foods that you're eating. Um, it doesn't tell us what foods on just the GI map, but it does say that there's a problem. And yours was very low.
So when we talk about it being low,
Mhm.
it makes more sense to me if it's high, right? Like it makes more sense to me that like, oh, your immune system is over responsive because you're eating things that your body doesn't like. That
Yeah.
makes more sense to me, but when it's low, that doesn't make as much sense to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, does that mean that you're more likely to react to foods because you don't have this defense in place? To me, it's like I intellectually understand the high side more than I understand the problem of the low side.
Yeah. Usually when I see it low, it's because it's been going on for a longer period of time
Okay.
where the response is
It's
just,
like burnt
oh, I
out
can't
kind
do it
of.
anymore. I can't keep up anymore. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. A
Well,
low
yeah.
marker,
So then
chronic,
that's
and connected with chronic stress. That's another big thing.
so
Yeah.
interesting. Man, I have my work cut out for
Yeah.
me. So one of the things that you and I talked about when we did the GI map was like whether or not a food sensitivity test makes sense as the next step. Because what you were explaining is
Yeah.
like, I had a lot of good stuff, and then I had a few things that
Mhm.
were not good. But you were saying if there was somebody that everything was off, it wouldn't make sense to do a food sensitivity test because it would basically show that like everything's a problem, even though that's less about foods you're sensitive to and more about the fact that your gut is just like not in a healthy spot. And so you were saying if like everything's off, you probably wouldn't recommend a food sensitivity test. So why did it make sense in my case for our next step to be a food sensitivity test?
Yeah, yeah, and it's and different practitioners, just so you know, will have different opinions on this, on when to do the
Yeah.
food sensitivity, and when it's appropriate. Some people do all the testing right up front, no matter what. Um, I don't always agree with that for everybody. I like to see first and see just like this, like, oh, you know what? You have some bad bacteria, you have some good bacteria, right? Some bad bacteria issues, some good bacteria issues. But nothing crazy, right? Nothing where I was like, oh no, but I was like, yeah, it's just decent. The H.
Yeah.
pylori, and I was like, okay, okay. But I was like, there's got to be something else, especially with some of the symptoms you talked about. And then the other GI markers, you had certain GI markers that were really good, really,
Yeah.
really good. And I was like, it's got to be something that you're eating. You are eating
Yeah.
something that is contributing to the problem here. And you can go
Yeah.
through a big food elimination diet, all this stuff you can try, or you can just take the food sensitivity and see from
Right.
an immune reaction what your body's responding to right now. Because it can change. It can change. As your system changes, as your stress levels change, as your body gets healthier and stronger and has more of a capacity for stress as time goes on, that stuff, it can change. So I don't always agree with doing it right away, but for this, I was like, yep, there's enough good stuff here going on digestive wise with digestive function. I think it makes
Yeah.
sense to, yeah, because everything else in that whole box,
Yeah.
like chef's kiss, gorgeous. But
Before
that
we
one marker was
jump over to the food sensitivity test and talk about what that tells us, what is your recommendation for your average client on redoing this? Is it like you're feeling better, you're good, or is it important to kind of keep an eye on it so that it doesn't get you further downstream with problems, even if you're not physically observing symptoms? Like what is your, do you have like a standard response regarding retesting with the GI map?
I gut stuff is different for everyone. So I don't have a specific standard for everyone kind of
Yep.
overall, but I do
Yep.
recommend doing like re-looking at a gut test. Soonest would be about 3 months, but
Yep.
usually it's, around that 4 to 5 month range, sometimes six
Okay.
months, again, depending on what you have going on, and other
Yeah.
tests that we've done. Yeah, but I have done GI maps just because there were so many things to work on. Like they had a parasite infection and candida and all this stuff. So I want to make sure we've properly taken care of some of the big bad issues first before targeting some of
Yeah.
the other things. Yeah.
Before we switch over to the food sensitivity test, and I'll show you guys my results there, one of the cool things that I thought was really cool that the GI map does is that it shows if you have any antibiotic resistance, which,
Yeah.
probably wasn't something that was necessary 15 or 20 years ago, but I don't have any antibiotic resistance. But I think that that's so important. If I know you mentioned like if you have some of these virulence factors, somebody would be more likely to makes sense for antibiotic treatment versus having the time and the bandwidth to try out a more natural, a more gentler approach. But if you were going to go the antibiotic route, it would be super, super helpful to have this information on resistance, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
is that how you use it?
Yes. Absolutely. Yep. If somebody has virulence factors and then they show up with and this is for the H. pylori. You've
Yep,
got H.
yep, yep.
pylori, you've got virulence factors, it's not good, right? And it's causing a lot of the current issues. So you're like, okay, what's next step? You want to do an antibiotic. And if it says that you have, a resistant strain to, what's the first one, amoxicillin or something?
Amoxicillin, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, amoxicillin. And say you'd go in and they'd be like, oh, well, let's put you on an amoxicillin. And you're like, yeah, but I have the resistant strain for that. It would wipe out all of the other bacteria, like good and bad in your gut. But what would be left would be the H. pylori. So H. pylori then could
Right. So
run
you'd be in a
rampant.
worse, yeah,
Yes,
that would be
yes,
so
much
bad.
worse. So it checks for that. Yeah. So you can
That's
make
so
a
important.
really good decision. If needed, you can have all the information to make the best decision. Yes. Yes.
So we
Hmm.
went on and it took a few weeks to get the results we got. We did our food sensitivity test. And when I looked at the overview, I was like, fantastic. I can eat meat and edible mushrooms and coffee. Fantastic, right? Because the overview, it gives, for those of you that are listening, it gives this color coded system. Red is like, don't go near it. Yellow is like, minimize, but in my case, eliminate for 4 to 6 weeks just to allow the gut to heal. And green is like, you're good to go. And on the overview page, the only thing that is green for me is meat, edible mushrooms, and I hate mushrooms, and coffee and tea. But the interesting thing is too, and this is why it's so helpful to work with somebody like you through this, is food sensitivity wise, coffee is good. H. pylori wise, coffee no bueno, right? I mean, from an H.
Hmm.
pylori standpoint,
Yeah.
even though I'm sensitive to the coffee, the coffee probably shouldn't be there. Am I right? Because if you say no, I'm going to start drinking coffee again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Fine. So
Yeah.
I'm
There's
not drinking
oh my
coffee.
gosh. Where is it? I'm pulling it too. Yeah.
you see my screen? So,
Yeah,
so
those are all things together. Yeah.
then though, it doesn't just give you those broad categories. It breaks things down by category. So like milk and egg, it doesn't just say like milk is out. It goes through buttermilk and then it goes through all your different kinds of cheeses. You get a different rating for Gouda, cottage cheese, mozzarella, Parmesan, buffalo, goat cheese, goat milk, quail eggs, egg white, egg yolk, sheep cheese, sheep milk, like all sorts of different things, cottage cheese, all of this different stuff is on there. And for me, some of it's red, some of it's green, but I think we agree that because of these results, dairy's out right now, right?
Yes. Yes. Taking a break from dairy. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
And some of this just has to do with like cheeses and dairies are processed differently. There's different
right,
enzymes in a pasteurized versus raw versus
right,
did you cook the milk? Did you drink the milk
right,
just straight from the fridge, or did you put it in a dish that was baked in the oven that breaks down certain proteins or not? Because that
right,
can make a difference in terms of what you would
right,
be sensitive to.
right.
But for what you've got going on, we were like, let's just take a little break from
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
For a little while, we'll take a break from it. Then when we
Yeah.
go to the meat section, like I'm good. I'm good. This is the only section that lights up all green. Like this is just go. Duck's good, beef's good, veal's good, venison, goat, stag. I can have horse. Hey, if my husband's cooking horse, I can have it. Chicken, turkey, rabbit, lamb, ostrich is on the menu. Pork,
Right.
boar, we can do it all. Fish was a little bit of a mixed bag, mostly green, but a couple of things that are just like a no-go for now.
Mhm.
Crab is a no-go. Crayfish is a no-go. Abalone, I don't even know what that is. And sole is out. So,
Mhm.
but mostly like meat and fish, I'm good. But then we
Mhm.
get to cereals, canola, bad, 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 which honestly, like they should just make that red for everybody for their own sake, right? Just not even test, just like it's a no for everybody. But
Mhm.
canola was like super no. And the cool thing that I like about this is it doesn't just give you this color coding system, it gives you an actual value. So you can see like what your worst offenders are. So that if you want to roll the dice, like you kind of know what's the biggest trouble. But this whole category is just out for me for now, right? I
Yep.
mean, it's just a no.
Yeah.
And then nuts, same thing, like was a mixed bag. But the thing about nuts is there's other things going on with phytates and lectins and all of that stuff when you're trying to heal your gut. That category's out. Legumes is
Mhm.
out. Peanuts might have been my highest like problem thing. But you know what was right behind peanuts in terms of like bad news for me? Pineapple.
Yeah.
Pineapple was like a big old no. Um, as was garlic. You mentioned garlic. Garlic was right up there and one of my worst offenders. Most vegetables are out, but I'm still are in, but I'm still taking a break on them because they can be a little tougher on the gut. But it's really cool. I mean, when you look at this, one of the things that I mean, obviously, yes, we're going really limited for 4 to 6 weeks to see what we can heal and do. Do you find that when people know what they're sensitive to and they stay away from those things consistently, not like kind of sort of sometimes, right? Do you find like it makes a really big difference
Yes. Mhm. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
quickly?
Yeah, there is and one of the way a common thing that happens for people is like nuts and seeds, whether or not you're having an actual reaction, like we'll say sesame, right? People eat or sunflower seeds. Sunflower seeds. People love, oh, I love to munch on trail mix and it's got sunflower seeds in it and blah, 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 right? Some people have a really hard time processing and digesting, and not just for the irritation, like immune response to it, but it's also a seed, so you have to chew it and it can be really harsh on your gut. So just taking a break from some of
Right.
these things, like you said, the vegetables, the fibrous component of that,
Yeah.
it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of work, it's
Yeah.
hard on your gut. So to just take a
Yeah.
break and let that repair happen, oh, so beautiful. That
Yeah.
when you come back to it, you'll know like, okay, yep, I ate this. There's this much of a fiber component. I could handle it, but this other thing, higher fiber to it. Oof, I'm not ready for that yet. It's easy to
It's
pick out.
interesting. I think through how some of my clients might perceive a test like this.
Yeah.
For example, cane sugar was green for me, no problem. And so I imagine people being like, so I can have a chocolate bar. But I think it's a really important, like what you just touched on, there's a really big difference between you're not having an immune response to this, but we know that sugar is inflammatory. So if the goal is to heal your gut, that's why I think that like not only having a practitioner that you work with, like you're it for me, or it's just like using common sense to put two and two together just because you're not like they use the color green. So let's just say I have a green light for cane sugar. It's still a really bad idea for me to have sugar if I want to heal my gut. Same thing with coffee. I saw coffee as green and I was like, yay, but it's not because H. pylori doesn't like coffee, right? Coffee is just a harsh thing to put into your system. And so if you want to heal, you've got to consider those things. And that can make it tricky if you're trying to do this on your own to interpret this kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you ever have people who are like, oh, I'm good. I'm good with sugar. I'm good
Yeah.
with coffee. I'm good with cocoa. So here I go, just like making up all these concoctions that while I'm not like immune reacting to them,
Yeah.
they are going to prevent my healing.
Yes. Yes. And I see this a lot with, I'm going to just say carbs in general. Like with both tests, you have to kind of put all the information together and take it
Yeah.
together. There are some
Right.
people who their GI map shows bacteria and certain enzymes. Your body's not processing carbohydrate yet. Oh, look, I can have all the carbs from my
Right.
sensitivity. Well,
Right.
immune wise, that's fine, but your body's still not breaking it down. So it really is
Right.
together that
Yeah.
information so valuable for what to do next. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Uh, with this particular test, do you have the same thoughts around retesting and that it's kind of different for everybody? Low end would be 3 months or then 4 to 5. Like, because I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing everything right. I'm by the book. I'm miserably avoidant of everything except meat. Like it is just, I am like so strict and whatever. I I'm very eager to be like, is it helping? Is it help? Are we, except for the fact that, it's a few $100s.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on retesting timing? Is it necessary? Do you recommend it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's this one again is just about the same time frame. Soonest I would ever do it is about 3 months. Otherwise, up to 6 months is good. Or just looking at, because again, we're looking at the immune response. How are you doing inflammation wise, immune wise? Like, how do you feel things have progressed overall systemically for you? That's a big
Yeah,
factor. I've had people redo these tests and not a lot changes because they just haven't given their body enough time.
yeah,
And I've had people redo the test and everything's totally different,
yeah.
5 months later, because they went through a huge turnover process internally. So, yeah, it
So
really does
you and I
depend per person.
we talked about 4 to 6 weeks of this elimination diet, which
Yep.
quite frankly, it feels like a long time when almost everything's off the table. Garlic is off the table, which influences like so much that, I would either cook with or get, if I'm going out to eat, like I have to consider, did you use butter? I can't have butter. Did you use, like all of these different things? It makes it very complicated. And I would imagine for me, I'm highly motivated because of my symptoms, right? Like that, it just makes it easier. But my sense is that that's hard for a lot of people to remain
Yeah.
consistent for 4 to 6 weeks with an elimination diet. But let me ask you this. What happens if you're inconsistent, right? Like from a healing perspective, let's say you're like good a lot of the time and not so good some of the time. How does that impact your healing? Is it something where like a little is better than nothing, or you really have to be all in order to heal?
Yeah. It does depend on what we're looking at here, but overall in general, the healing still can happen. It's just slower. So instead of
Yeah,
doing it for 4 to 6 weeks, you'd be looking at 8 to 10 weeks of
yeah,
something for an elimination if you're not following it as strictly. There are some
yeah,
things like sugar and gluten and stuff because they're so inflammatory. If you're like, well, I'm only having gluten once a week, it's like, well, you're sort of starting over then every week.
It's
Um,
like I described it on my last show as like kind of like picking a scab.
yes, yes,
Yeah. Like
that is a great
you were
analogy.
doing so good and you just tore it wide open and now your body has to do that work all over again. And it is hard. It is hard, but from my own experience, it's also very hard to have nasty gut symptoms or
Yeah,
anxiety or skin issues or, an impaired immune system or any number of other things that this can impact. This can impact your hormones. It can impact everything. So like, it's sort of one of those things where I'd rather have the hard of an elimination diet for the sake of healing than the hard of symptoms while I eat whatever I want.
yes.
You know?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to put the links for the GI map, for the food sensitivity test. You guys so graciously gave me a discount to pass on to my listeners. So I'll put all of that in the show description. I'll also put like your podcast, your social, so that everybody can connect with you. If somebody's listening right now and they're thinking like, I have a lot of these issues, or I'd really like these answers, what is one thing that you would just love to put out there as a message to the people who are like, I know I should probably deal with this. Like I've just kind of been avoiding it. What do you want to say to the listener who's kind of on the fence about taking this stuff more seriously?
Um, like doing something is better than nothing. There are so many
Mhm.
people who think, gosh, I should, maybe try this or that, but they don't, like, you don't actually do it and you don't actually
Yeah,
move forward with it, or don't, even if it's not a GI map, like, will that tell us all the things? Yeah, it's a great place to start, especially if you're sick and tired of trying a bunch of different diets only to not
yeah,
have it work or whatever. But doing something, because even coming to the table with the conversation of, okay, I've done um grain free and this is how it went for me, or I went vegetarian for 3 months and this is how it went for me, that tells me a lot of
yeah,
information about your body. Just trying something, try
yeah,
something, because if you don't change the gut process, just it has such a hard time getting better on its own. It needs
yeah.
help, right? And your body has this amazing ability to heal, to get better, as long as it has that opportunity. So that's what we're looking to give
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Beth. You've been a tremendous help to me and my crazy text messages. I text Dr. Beth and I'm like, what about this? How about this? I don't understand this. Help me with this. I'm worried about this. But also you're just a tremendous resource to my listeners. So thank you guys. I'll put all of the ways that you can connect with Dr. Beth, with her podcast, with her work, with her programs, with the tests that she interprets and helps you put the pieces of the puzzle together. All of that'll be in the show description. So Dr. Beth, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. It is so important and so valuable, and I just really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I so appreciate you highlighting this, because not enough people know that you can get this done and look at your
Yeah,
digestive health in this way. So I appreciate it.
absolutely. All right. We will do a follow-up when I retest and we will see how everything went and we will
Yes.
see this tremendous transformation and we will share it with you. It is coming. Mark your calendars within the next 6 months. It is happening. And then Dr. Beth will just have 10 million clients because she will have demonstrated that she can help all of us overcome our tough stuff. All right. Thanks, Dr. Beth. Thanks, everybody. I will see you tomorrow.